Now for something else. By Withered Rose. A month ago, an article of mine was published in the New Columbia Movement's webzine. It occurred to me that most of you gremlins have not read that piece, as the New Columbia Movement's audience does not overlap with most of you fine folks. I was messaged on Telegram to write a piece for the webzine, so I wrote about Brooke Adams, Hilaire Belloc, and counter-revolution, and I think some of you will find it interesting. You can find the piece here. An Economic Reaction. An Economic Reaction by Withered Rose. There are few things more real than economics. Being able to have more than one child, sending your child to a good Christian school, affording healthy organic food, rather than the chemical poison sold at the dollar store, living in a safe neighborhood, or having a chance to live out your vocation, all these very real, very important things, are economic. It is easy for some to hand-wave money talk away as mere materialism, as if the incarnation did not happen and as if it is remotely Christian to eschew the material world, and it is especially easy to do so for people who do not need to worry about money. We can speak of the necessity of a Christian social order until we are blue in the face, but when it comes to making it happen, then the role of economics becomes apparent. Do you want large families? Most Americans, even if they wanted that, could not afford to feed more than one or two mouths. Do you want healthy morals in society? Unless these morals are being exemplified in your child's school, which means a Christian school that you will have to pay yearly for, then there is a good chance that she will be swayed by her peers and teachers to an alternative vision. Do you want conservatives to have political hegemony? First, they need to stop being significantly poorer than liberals. Brooks Adams, the great-grandson of John Adams, wrote in his Theory of Social Revolutions, "I assume it as self-evident that those who, at any given moment, are the strongest in any civilization, will be those who are at once the ruling class, those who own most property, and those who have most influence on legislation. The weaker will fare hardly in proportion to their weakness. Such is the order of nature. But, since those are the strongest through whom nature finds it, for the time being, easiest to vent her energy, and as the whole universe is in ceaseless change, it follows that the composition of ruling classes is never constant, but shifts to correspond with the shifting environment. When this movement is so rapid that men cannot adapt themselves to it, we call the phenomenon a revolution, and it is with revolutions that I now have to do." He applies this to the French Revolution, concluding that meanwhile, under the stimulant of applied science, centralization went on resistlessly, and the cost of administration is proportionate to centralization. To bear the burden of a centralized government, taxes must be equal and movement-free, but here was a rapidly centralizing nation, the essence of whose organism was that taxes should be unequal and that movement should be restricted. As the third quarter of the 18th century closed with the death of Louis XV, all intelligent French administrators recognized the dilemma: either relief must be given, or France must become insolvent, and revolution supervene upon insolvency. But for the aristocracy, revolution had no terrors, for they believed that they could crush revolution as their class had done for 1,000 years. With industrialization came necessary centralization of administration, and, ultimately, the French government was unable to maintain solvency and its present form of government in the face of this necessary adaptation. Aristocrats, who used to be, but were no longer, the principal economic actors, were exempt from taxation, but the factory owners and industrialists, who were the principal economic actors, were taxed considerably. Accordingly, the economically franchised class became resentful of the ruling class, who no longer had its economic might, and overthrew the crown. To discuss what Adams means about free travel would take us too far afield, so let our mention of taxation suffice. Out of the industrialization of France came a ruling class fit for an industrial age, replacing a ruling class that was fit for a long-gone agricultural age. To say this is not to endorse the Jacobin terror or, even their philosophy, but only to acknowledge Adams' point, namely, that social revolutions are conditioned by economic revolutions and the former are administrative conclusions of the later. If you want a social revolution or a political revolution, then, you first need an economic revolution. Before we can speak of an economic revolution, and what it would look like, however, we need to speak of the destruction of the American economy and how it led to the social situation we are in now. To this end, we affirm with Hilaire Belloc, that special, conscious, and intelligent transformation of his environment which is peculiar to the peculiar intelligence and creative faculty of man we call the production of wealth. Wealth is matter which has been consciously and intelligently transformed from a condition in which it is less to a condition in which it is more serviceable to a human need. Without wealth man cannot exist. The production of it is a necessity to him, and though it proceeds from the more to the less necessary, and even to those forms of production which we call luxuries, yet in any given human society there is a certain kind and a certain amount of wealth without which human life cannot be lived, as, for instance, in England today, certain forms of cooked and elaborately prepared food, clothing, warmth, and habitation. Therefore, to control the production of wealth is to control human life itself. To refuse man the opportunity for the production of wealth is to refuse him the opportunity for life. Both libertarianism and communism destroy the average man's wealth by centralizing production in the hands of a cosmopolitan elite, leaving the masses at their mercy. Being unable to produce wealth of one's own, the worker becomes dependent on either the government, as in socialism, on private corporations, as in capitalism, or on both, as is in the case in America and most European countries. Unable to produce wealth of his own, as the means of production are concentrated in the hands of a few, the American worker becomes dependent on the wealthy that has no regard for his well-being. Starting your own business, creating your own wealth, is an ever more challenging feat as companies like Amazon receive $3.7 billion in taxpayer subsidies a year and pay next to no taxes of their own, all the while mom and pop shop receive scraps, at best, and are taxed more than any Fortune 500 company. The worker becomes an interchangeable cog in an economy structured against small, local, and family-owned business, and given the portion of the population that goes to college, not even a college degree can set the worker apart from the hundreds of applicants applying for the same job. Finding meaningful work or a salary large enough to support a large family, let alone to send his children to a Christian school, has become a near possibility for most Americans. Adams and Belloc make the same argument in different ways. If you desire social and political change, you need economic change first. Big gestures against LGBT+, abortion, or unfettered immigration, are, at the moment, the complaints of an economically servile class. You are not Charlemagne making a stand for Christendom, you are a serf who has gotten it in his head that he can, and should, tell his master how to live. We are irrelevant gnats annoying the wealthy. It is not nice to say, I know, but if we do not recognize this then we will continue to lose ever more ground. How does the conservative become relevant? How can something approximating a Christian social order be created? Those who believe in such an order, namely the lower middle class, need to become economically dominant. As the industrial bourgeois replaced the agrarian aristocracy in the French Revolution, the conservative middle class needs to replace the liberal upper class in the upcoming economic revolution. Belloc, joining his friend G.K. Chesterton, had a similar vision and called it distributism. Instead of a few corporations, or a few bureaucracies, employing the majority of a population, a widespread network of small, local, and family-owned businesses would enable the average worker to produce his own wealth. 10,000 local farms, instead of 10 corporate farms, 10,000 CNC shops, instead of 10 factories, 10,000 hardware stores, instead of Home Depot and Lowe's. By shifting the economic center of America from Amazon, Walmart, and BlackRock to the local and family-owned, the new center, made up, by and large, by conservatives, will have economic, and thus political, power over the old center, made up, by and large, by liberals. Effecting such a shift is, in theory, simple and quick. Every year the federal and state governments vote on the yearly budget. Large portions of both federal and state budgets consist of subsidies, and the closely related issues of taxation. Provided that a number of candidates are elected that desire to effect such a shift, it is entirely possible that subsidies are redirected to locally owned businesses and that major corporations are taxed more than mom-and-pop shops. In fact, this happened in a number of states during the initial COVID-19 lockdowns. Regional dairy farms, for example, were given subsidies or had their taxes slashed in a number of states. Was it enough for an economic revolution? No. It was one step in a long waltz. I bring this small victory up because it is a proof of concept, a proof balanced by the majority of Americans in all demographics supporting small businesses over large corporations, showing that what I am speaking of is possible. Given polling data, it should be an easy sweep for a cohort of candidates to be elected on the platform of helping small and local businesses. This cohort has the possibility to create an economy that helps the American family and undo the destruction of the servile state.